thank you everyone for joining our lunchtime discussion today about money and mental health. Got two amazing speakers with me today, and they're going to be covering some fascinating new research into the link between IQ and financial stress, and how money worries can actually affect us so deeply that they even impact IQ. And they're also going to cover how employers can help when that's happening in the workplace. Also, before we kick off, I just wanted to mention we've got a lot to cover today, so we might not have time for a live Q&A at the end. But if you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat throughout, and we'll make sure to get back to you afterwards. So I'm going to hand over now to our speakers to introduce themselves. Sim, do you want to kick off?
Of course, thank you so much. And a big warm welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited for this webinar. My name is Simone. You can call me Sim for short. I am from sunny South Africa, but currently living in London for the last year and a half. It is my privilege to be joining the stage today with Emily. I'm a psychological counselor and a wellbeing trainer here at Plumm. And Plumm is a great HR platform with mental health at its core. If you've not heard about Plumm yet, go check it out. Really prioritizing well-being in the workplace, and we have come up with great tools as well as mental health tools such as MIAI and our therapist and chat sessions, whereby we're really trying to prioritize and subsidize mental health while implementing seamless HR approaches throughout organizations. I'm so excited today to be talking about money and mental health. I think most of us stress about money. We think about money all the time, and I'm so excited to be unraveling and looking at different ways and strategies and techniques. I know that this session is really going to equip, empower, and inspire you to look at yourself first inwards and then outwards and see how we can drive this forward together. Over to you, Emily.
Oh, what a great warm-up, Sim. Thanks so much for that. That's a really good framing of what we're going to do today. Nice to meet you. I'm Emily Trant. I'm Chief Impact Officer at Wagestream. Wagestream is a financial well-being platform that's rebundling banking services around the employer. We work for over 1,000 employers in the UK and reach over 2 million individuals. And we typically support people who do work that is often described as frontline or essential. So people in professions such as hospitality, retail, healthcare, support services, where actually historically a lot of financial services haven't been designed to meet the way they earn and the way they spend and the way they manage their money. So we're sort of here to fix that. And my job as Chief Impact Officer is to understand the impact our product and service creates on the people who use them, but also how that flows through to society as a whole. So I do really lots of interesting work as part of that job, but one of the key things I do is I lead our program of academic research. And so I wanted to talk to you today about a piece of work that I've done recently. But first, I want to start by framing this with a few money and mental health stats. And just to warn you, we're going to start grim, but we're going to get better. We're going to finish on a high. Okay, so this is the bad news section, and then we'll build from here. And so in May, not that long ago, we went out and did a nationally representative survey of 2,000 people in work and asked them about how their mental health was and how money had been impacting it recently. And we found that 54%, so over half of all people, were reporting that in the last 3 months, they felt their mental health had declined due to money worries. And again, I'm going to say this several times, this was a nationally representative sample of employees. So over half of employed individuals are telling us that they feel like their mental health is declining. 1 in 5, 21%, were worrying about money every single day of the week. And a third were saying that they weren't sleeping well. It was affecting their sleep because of money worries. And anyone who's ever had a bad night's sleep knows how fundamental sleep is to your overall well-being. But it's not just feeling a bit grouchy the next day. Sleep is almost magical in terms of its powers around health. It affects almost every system in your body, from your hormones, your appetite, your immune system, your heart health. And so when your sleep is affected, it can have really serious long-term consequences for your overall health. And again, nationally representative, a third of people are saying their sleep is worse due to worrying about money. And for nearly a quarter of people, 23%, the impact of money worries made it hard for them to make decisions about money. So they were finding that they were struggling to make productive decisions because they were thinking and worrying about it too much. And you can kind of hear what a vicious circle that's creating for people, where they're worrying about money and then they're struggling to make decisions about money. And you can imagine kind of what's going to happen next. And so this is the framing. This is a slightly grim background that I kind of wanted to present first before diving into some research. And now I want to take you into what I call the accidental research report. And it's not like I accidentally wrote it and didn't realize I'd done it. It was more that I was looking at trying to understand within the wage stream ecosystem how demographic characteristics correlated with or predicted the way people were managing their money. So whether that affected the way people were saving or spending or earning and how they felt about their money, and could we link anything with gender or age, or even things like household role. So, what was the impact of being a main bill payer in the household? And when I was doing this research, this finding came out that was really surprising. And it was the fact that the overwhelming majority of people were reporting that they were now spending less. And the reason why this was so surprising was kind of for three reasons. Firstly, I was collecting this data kind of in the height of cost of living, when food price inflation was around 20%. And I personally remember going to the store every week to pick up milk, and the price of milk being 5p more expensive every time. It went from 110 to 115 to 125, all the way up to 165. And so in this period, when every time I went to pick up an essential item for the household, it was more expensive, the people in my research data set were spending less. Another reason why this was surprising is because they're not high earners. So the typical take-home pay of the 4,500 research subjects that I was looking at was £1,400 a month. So I was earning more than £1,400 a month, and I wasn't spending less. I was spending more. And then the last piece of the puzzle was that the significant majority of the people in this research were using part of the wage stream toolkit that enabled them to get paid flexibly, so get paid on demand outside of their employer's pay cycle. And so they were dealing with high costs and peak inflation. They were not high earners, and they were getting paid more frequently. They were accessing their pay more often than their kind of fixed monthly pay cycle. And so it kind of intuitively, you would imagine that those sort of set of factors would lead people to be spending more, not less. But they overwhelmingly report that they were spending less. Around 80% were spending less. And when I dug into the qualitative side of things, because we always ask why, you can design the best research questions, but you have to ask why. You always learn something new. There were sort of two sides that came out. The first side was functional. So some people were just functionally spending less because of the toolkit, because they were, for example, able to pay their bills on time, which maybe didn't align with their pay cycle. And so they weren't paying late payment fees, or they didn't have access to other payment tools like a credit card, but a sale could come up and then they could use their earned wages to take advantage of a sale and save money. So quite functional. But the majority of the reasons that came back in the why were actually more emotional and behavioral. And people spoke about feeling calm, not panic buying anymore, feeling more in control. And even when I looked at the other side of who's spending more and why are they spending more, I saw a lot of positivity. Again, I saw an overwhelming amount of positivity, where people spoke about the confidence to meet their needs, knowing that they were able to pay a bill on time because they felt in control of their money, or even feeling more confident to participate in leisure and kind of some of life's pleasures because they understood their financial situation much better. And so this finding, this kind of like overwhelming finding that the majority of people spent less, and the reason why was this kind of real behavioral change around how they were feeling about their money, kind of sent me down the path looking for an answer. I was like, well, what explains this? How do I find something that tells me why I've seen this result? And this is my answer. Number 13. This is what I came across. 13 is what we call the bandwidth tax. It's the price of financial stress. It's the price of worrying about money. And again, right now in the UK, about a fifth of people are worrying about money every single day. And so this bandwidth tax, it's not measured in pounds or dollars or time off work or presenteeism or productivity. It's actually measured in IQ points. And it's the idea that when you're giving over kind of unwanted cognitive power to thinking or worrying about something, it eats up your available IQ to the tune of 13 IQ points. So it's that constant mental juggle of, do I pay this bill late and keep the cash, or do I pay it on time? And what do I do if something else comes up and it's summer holidays soon? Can I afford to take time off and put the kids in camp? How much does the camp cost? You know, what if I don't do that? Can I manage to work while they're at home? What should I do about such and such? You know, I've got the MOT coming up. Can I get away with paying it a bit late? How do I do this, then, there, so that I can make everything line up? And you don't intend to think about those things, but it's kind of the emotional labor of thinking about money consumes IQ points. And 13 IQ points is a lot. It's enough to take somebody from average intelligence down to a category called borderline deficient. And if you flip it from average up to superior. But it's more than just your cognitive power. It also affects your executive function. So your decision making and your impulse control. So it means that you are, when you're experiencing this bandwidth tax, it means that you are more likely to be rash, to make a bad decision, to shout at a customer or snap at your kids, or to make a financial choice that sort of solves your pain today but isn't good for your long-term future or even your midterm future. And it can even affect your health choices. So you might be trying to look after your health and kind of, I don't know, eat more fruit, but you grab the brownie instead of the apple because you're having a hard time controlling yourself and you're having a hard time making productive decisions. And Sim, I know you know a lot about the psychology behind this, and I can't wait to pick your brain on this later. But I just want to kind of take you through the rest of the research first. And so this bandwidth tax, this IQ concept, is known as scarcity mindset. And there's been quite a body of academic research that's studied this concept over the years. And it does exactly as I've just described. It increases that impulsivity, that irritability, that anxiety, and it decreases that decision-making, that planning, that control, and that focus. And look, anything can be scarce, and probably everybody who's sitting here listening has experienced scarcity mindset at some point in their lives. Time can be scarce. So when you're under time pressure,
Yeah.
It's when you get sloppy and you make mistakes. And I always use the example of you send the email to the person about the person, right? Like it's the thing with time pressure, or even social interaction, can be scarce. So you can have loneliness, you can have an unconscious fixation due to loneliness. Time pressure, as an example, comes and goes. So unless you're incredibly unfortunate, you'll get peaks and troughs. The challenge with financial scarcity is it tends to be kind of persistent and pervasive, and it affects your entire life. And because you're making worse decisions about money, it puts you in this sort of exasperating loop where you exacerbate the condition that created it to begin with, and find yourself much worse off than kind of your original position sort of would have dictated. And coming back to this research, again, it was originally sort of looking at demographic characteristics. So this kind of begs the question, who is most likely to experience scarcity mindset? Women. Yay, it's us, right? We win all the best prizes. I know you can see this on your screen, but I'm going to read it out for you because I think it's really powerful. Like, globally and in the UK, women are more likely to experience poverty, be financially excluded, have a credit score that's lower than men, be paid less, accumulate less wealth, spend more time caring for children, be financially responsible for children, be responsible for financial management in their household. It is a heavy burden and comes with a high cost. And in our data set of 2 million frontline workers in the UK, we see this. So in the UK, women represent about half the workforce, and they do 60% of the low paid work, right? So we do more than our fair share of the low paid work. In our membership, where we're looking at individuals who, like I said earlier, their typical take home pay is around £1,400 a month, nearly 2/3 are women, 64% are women. And these women, 6 in 10 of them are working part-time. 7 in 10 are paid by the hour, and being paid by the hour brings characteristics of volatility with it, where your paycheck isn't the same month to month, and often your payday isn't the same either. You get paid on a 4-weekly cycle, not a monthly cycle. So you've got this additional facet of financial management you're having to cope with. And 8 in 10 earn less than the UK's national median wage, which, as at the end of last year, was just shy of £35,000 a year. So 8 in 10 earn less than £35,000 a year. And these women in our database, they were more than twice as likely to be looking after a dependent child. They were 7 times as likely to be a single parent. They were 8 percentage points more likely to be the main or only breadwinner. 3/4 are the main or only breadwinner in their household. They are leading the finances for their household, and they are responsible for the earnings in their household as well as the spending decisions. And they were actually doing a decent job trying to put savings aside, but they were equally more likely to have £0 available in savings. And they were about 15% more likely to be frequently worrying about money. And probably most depressingly, half as likely to feel confident about meeting their financial goals in the future. So a pretty grim picture. But I did promise we would end on some positivity. So let me kind of take you back to the beginning, which is this finding that people were feeling better about their money, that they were spending less, and that they were feeling more in control. That seems to be explained by this concept of scarcity mindset and these 13 IQ points. And I went to understand, well, what are we doing that's potentially alleviating the scarcity mindset, that's enabling people to make better decisions and feel better and improve their mental health? And then how can that track across to kind of other employers or other situations? And so kind of in the literature, there were kind of 3 things that really lined up as alleviating factors. So the first one was visibility. So just understanding your financial situation and paying attention to it is really important. And for a lot of people, that visibility is an uncomfortable thing. So many people don't enjoy checking their online banking app, for example. Other than payday, most of the time it's kind of heading in one direction, right? Money's going down and down and down as bills are coming out. And one of the nice things that we saw with the Wagestream toolkit that people really engaged with was we were showing people their pay as it accrued. So as they worked shifts or as they did their normal hours, they were seeing their pay build up and up and up in a pay period. So it created this really positive engagement with money that really hadn't been there before. So people were better equipped and better informed. There's other ways of giving people visibility. You can look at things like interactive pay slips. You can look at things like shift scheduling policies. So there's different ways to think about giving people visibility around their money, but just knowing what was going to happen is like a fundamental piece of how you approach managing money. And that really connects with predictability. So understanding what's going to happen when you get paid, when your bills are due. And again, there's features of our toolkit that drive this predictability, but that can also be achieved by things like the living hours standard from the Living Wage Foundation. And I think we're going to see more of this with a new Labour government in place, as they're looking at kind of labour market and workplace reform and moving away from things like 0 hours contract and kind of talking about beginning to require employers to give more predictability and more guaranteed hours and kind of contracts that reflect hours worked. This is currently a voluntary standard, but kind of coming down the pipe, it may end up being mandated. Predictability can also be achieved in other ways. So predictability can be achieved using it with a savings buffer. So getting people to build up financial resilience so they have something to fall back on. And we've done a lot of work in investing in getting people to save. We've done a long-term research trial with a couple of large employers in the UK with Co-op and Bupa, supported by Nest Insight and Harvard University. And we've found that with a really simple change, a really simple nudge, in fact, by flipping the default and saying, you're going to save unless you choose not to, so we'll automatically switch it on for you, a little bit like pensions auto-enrollment. We've lifted participation to over 70% of a workforce and really begun to show the impact on balance building in those workforces. The other part of predictability may also be access to state benefits and grants. So there's something like £23 billion each year that go unclaimed from state benefits, which is almost an unfathomably large number. Like £23 billion is hard to kind of wrap your head around. But having some predictable income from other sources, particularly for people who are in part-time work often correlates with caring responsibilities, and it can correlate with sort of health conditions that need managing. So that predictability is really important. And then the last piece of the puzzle is alignment. So how you can align inflows and outflows of money. And Professor Anandi Mandi of Oxford University has done a lot of work on this academic concept of scarcity mindset. And she writes about the fact that well-timed expenses require less mental effort to manage. So when they're well-timed, or when they're kind of recurring and predictable, so if you can take a constant effort and turn it into a one-time effort and make things predictable by aligning ins and outs, it can alleviate the impacts of that scarcity mindset and make it much easier for people to manage their money, using their whole selves and their kind of whole decision-making capability. And so this was the interesting thing for me, which is this tells me why people who were using flexible pay to get paid sooner than their regular payday were reporting spending less, because they were achieving that alignment, and that was really unlocking a big alleviating factor for them around this stress about money. So that's kind of a whistle-top tour of the research report. I know we're going to send it out to you afterwards, so I should have said that at the top if you were like furiously scribbling notes. This is all written down into a report. But yeah, Sim, I wanted to talk about it with you, and I'll stop sharing my screen and kind of hear your hot take.
Firstly, I just want to massively congratulate you for all of this research. And if you're listening to this today, before we even continue with this conversation, I just almost want you to contextualize everything that you've just heard. The first time I spoke to Emily, I kind of just sat with this information for a while and went, okay, so what does this mean for me? You obviously joined this webinar because you're interested in something with regards to financial well-being, and also seeing the great work that the team at Wagestream is doing. But I think it's important to always just, I always just think about it, well, how is this impacting me? And where am I at when it comes to managing my finances? And how does my financial well-being look like? How does this impact my stress and my anxiety? And I'm going to touch on that a little bit in a bit. But Emmy, I want to, just before I start talking more about the psychological impacts this could have and is having, and especially from like an HR well-being approach in the workplace, I think one thing that we're seeing more and more, especially in the HR space, is that so many of this financial stress has a direct impact on work performance. But despite this, we don't like to talk about money in general. Most individuals, they don't like to talk about financial stress. They don't like to talk to their employers about, hey, I would like to get a raise, or can we talk about this? Or I remember even speaking to one of my colleagues the other day, and I was saying, we were chatting about, money and how do I speak to my boss about money? What do you think might be the reason for this? Why people don't want to tell their employers or their managers about these worries? Because as your research also shows, it has a massive implementation on how they show up at work, but also how they do the work. And we know that the ripple effect on that is it will have a negative implementation on organizations as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you could lift the IQ of your workforce by
Exactly right. Yeah.
collectively, right? Or imagine in a healthcare setting, the impact on patient outcomes, or even if you're a retailer, that the brand value of your store staff being cheerful and present and helpful. It's funny that money is a funny thing. And I grew up in Canada, and like I grew up in a household that talks about money, but kind of by and large, it's seen as something embarrassing, and it's seen as something like we should be better at, like we should be, I don't know, adulting better or something like that, and everybody else has it under control. And to an extent, although there's still a lot of stigma around money, and I kind of liken financial well-being to kind of where mental well-being was 5-10 years ago. Haven't really unlocked those conversations fully. I do think the cost of living crisis has done us a favor, because a lot of people have who are maybe higher up the salary bands and might have previously been worrying or thinking about money, have suddenly kind of gone, oh, this is affecting me too. I wonder what's going on. And it's made it socially acceptable to ask about it and talk about it. But there's still that stigma. And even in some professions, it can affect your job, right? Like if you work in financial services, you might be put under additional monitoring if you reveal that you're financially stressed, because there's a corporate risk that you might behave in a way that's inappropriate. You know, there's a perceived corporate risk around your behavior. So in some sectors, it's just not okay to talk about it at work. And I think there's also this idea that it isn't work's business, which is bonkers, because your employer pays you. Like, they are deeply invested in your financial well-being. They are probably the number one source of your financial well-being. And so they're in your financial life. But I think there's this two-sided, like, oh, should we really be engaging in this with people and having more conversations and saying, you know, it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to address this. And the last thing I'll say is, I think there's a perception sometimes that financial well-being directly equates to paying people more. And financial well-being is really about how you think about your money, how you
Yeah.
feel about it,
Yeah.
how you manage it, can you live the life you want or are able to. And that doesn't necessarily mean the answer is always to pay people more. You can have very well-paid people with very poor financial well-being. So kind of breaking the link between those two things and saying it kind of augments pay, but it's not a replacement for it, and nor is the other true.
And I think also just thinking back to some of the information that you shared about, many of these individuals who are not getting paid as less, they're most probably the only individual who's getting a salary in that household. That also creates that hustle culture, right? Well, I need to find money somewhere else, so I'm going to be spending more of the little time I have with perhaps my loved ones, or even at work, trying to do something else to bring in more money. And it's exactly that, our behavior, the way we think about money, the way we feel about money. You mentioned something about how people perceive their banking apps, how often you open up your banking app, and that's the psychological effect you have. Do I have enough money when I walk into a shop to pay for my groceries? Or that fear if my card declines. And there's so many different elements that impacts then our psychological well-being when it comes to money and the money spent. Interesting enough that you mentioned your background and our upbringing, and I think that plays a massive part on how we handle financial stress, the way we were raised. If you were raised perhaps from a family that nurture nature approach, raised from a family background that always lived on a tight budget, always bought the cheapest thing on the shelf, there was never time for perhaps luxuries, or maybe it was, but there was always that fear of not having enough. That is going to train your brain on how you see money as an adult. And so one thing that we always do with some of our clients and partners is we have to also learn how to unlearn and relearn. So how do I see these things that's stressing me out? Firstly, acknowledge that. And is there a different way I can see it and approach it? And then I can retrain my brain, create those little neural pathways on taking those other more positive approaches. But also it's our communities, the people we surround ourselves with. So if you're constantly be surrounded by conversation with financial stress, everyone's stressing, this is terrible, we're just going to go down this rabbit hole of stress when we talk about money, then we also know that's going to have a very negative effect on our well-being and also just who we're becoming in our personal development. We all want to be nice human beings, but sometimes because money is something that we need to survive, we need money. It is something that is a big driving force when it comes to how we show up in this world. And so I'm even challenged a lot by the people I'm surrounded by, how's their approaches when it comes to this. Now, once again, I'm not saying we should share our salaries with everyone and talk about money all the time, but are the people that you're surrounding yourself with, how do they address financial stress or times when financial stress are high? And we know that when it comes to money, especially, there's a lot of things that's out of our control. Your pet might have to go in for an operation and you might not have that extra finances, you might fall ill, you might have to do XYZ, and you might not have that security. That might cause that extra anxiety. And so I'm quickly just going to, Emily, highlight the difference between when it comes to financial stress and the anxiety around finances, because I think it's important for us to also acknowledge the language we use when we talk about this. And so if there's something practically you want to take away from this webinar, is this: when I talk and address my financial stress going forward in the future, what are the words I'm using to talk about it? Because that's going to have a major impact on your approaches as well, and some of the great things that Emily has already spoken about. So we have to understand stress, just like we can stress about anything else in our lives. When I stress about finances, what type of stress am I experiencing? So is it eustress, acute stress, chronic stress, distress? Now, you might never have heard about these terms before, but is this financial stress that I've felt this since I've been a child, growing up in a household, and until today, I'm 40 years old and I've got a family and I'm still experiencing that. That's chronic stress. That's prolonged stress. That's going to start having a negative impact on your health, not just your mental health and well-being. And then if we start looking at perhaps acute stress or distress, that's short-term stress. I need to pay my vet bills, my doctor bills. I need to do this. I need to do that. Or I'm in debt and I don't know how to pay it off. And someone's going to come knocking on my door soon. What do I do? There's a time frame and a time limit on that. So stress, we always just have to keep in mind, it's what we feel in the here and the now. Anxiety, future focus. It has not happened yet. And that's where financial stress often comes in, right? I don't know if I'm going to make it to the end of the month. I don't know if I will be able to pay for this. And I think that, Emily, is where you and your team and the great tools you've created comes into play a lot, because I can start seeing into my future when it comes to how I can handle my money. And that alleviates, that just pulls down that level of anxiety when it comes to money. So I can confidently walk into the store knowing my budget is perhaps £50 to buy this week's groceries, but I can confidently spend that because I know I'm going to be okay, because I've got £300 lined up for this month's groceries. And if I stick into that, then I'll be fine. So it's simple things like that. And as we do more of that, what happens as well is we boost that confidence within ourselves. The more we start doing things good, I've stuck in my budget this month. Oh my goodness, I left the shop, and I know we were speaking about even spending less, and very insightful information, but I did this. Great job, Simone. I can do it again. And that's when that cycle in our minds also start kicking in, that reward. Oh, I can handle my money. I don't have to feel stressed about this, because I'm practicing this muscle of financial well-being.
That's really interesting that you describe it in that way, because that again aligns with what we see. And I would describe it using different words, but kind of I would talk about sort of engagement, creating engagement. And so another behavior we see is that people who engage with their money, and particularly people who use flexible pay to manage their money, are more likely to start saving. They're more likely to open up a savings pot and build financial resilience. And I think that aligns exactly with what you've just said, which is that mindset shift around, okay, hey, I'm doing it. I can do it. I can now do the next thing. And that's really important to understand, because often there's a perception that kind of using a money management tool like this is an indicator of distress or poor money management skills. And in fact, it's actually what we're seeing is the opposite, as people are building on those skills and kind of building this really positive engagement and those pathways. And how you describe it really does matter. Sort of using that positive language is super important.
And also to keep it real, I think, well, I know when we are going through financial stresses, and I think that's why context is so important, and especially we were talking about how can I talk to my employer about this, or whatever that might look like. But what is your context that you find yourself in? Maybe you have been experiencing financial stress or even financial burnout, if we want to use these terms, for decades, and it might take a lot longer for you to bounce back from that. And so when using an app as yours, or implementing tools that you've come up with, that can be seen almost as a plaster that we put on this problem to address the issue in the here and the now, to help the current situation that you find yourself in. But also maybe, well, I'm more prone to financial stress. Things will stress me out. I know myself. That's why I think self-awareness, education, and then implementation is very important when it comes to financial well-being, is to first say, well, let me start actually thinking about this. I think sometimes we're, as human beings, even just scared to think about our money. We know we need to save for a rainy day. We know we need investments. We know we need all these things. And it also doesn't really help that we look at social media and the news all the time, right? Because all that insight can just flood our mind with more anxiety-provoking thoughts around our money. Right now, currently, perhaps going through this recession, we know that it's hard out there. We hear this all the time, but what is our reality? And so even leaving the session today, I want you to look at your frame of reference and your situation. And when we address our financial well-being, look at you first. Look at your current situation before looking outwards at others. And I think that's really important and critical. Financial.
I want to pick up on a couple of things you said there. And so kind of that, I guess, that consolidation and then acting. We talk about moving from coping to planning, kind of being on that pathway. But you were saying people, you should do this, you should do that, and then you've got to sort of execute the behavior. Fundamentally, human beings are bad at executing the behavior. And there's a stat that's something like 0.5% of us act in a way that's economically rational, as in we take the steps and do the things over the long term that kind of economists and economic models would predict we should be doing. And this really played out over a decade ago in the UK, when kind of pensions auto-enrollment came in, because the population was persistently under-saving for pensions. And in fact, private sector pension participation was less than a third. So about 32% of people were saving. And in fact, 4 in 10 single female pensioners were in poverty. So it was a really significant problem. And then there but people knew they should be doing something about it. And there was all sorts of work done to try to get people to engage, to give them advice, to give them sessions with financial advisors. And everyone was like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to do it. And then they didn't. And it needed a big regulation, a big intervention to say, we're just going to do it for you. Like, we're going to switch it on, because we're kind of going with the grain of what you want. And I think when I think about kind of employers in the workplace and kind of people teams and benefits teams, to an extent, it feels very comfortable to land on education as the answer of like, but people generally know what they need to be doing. Think about your role as an enabler. How do you enable people to take that action, and how do you remove friction? And even for yourself, how do you enable yourself to take that action? How do you practice being kind to your future self and kind of, planting the seeds now that you need for later? It's really hard.
Yes. And I think it's very much linked to also, that decision-making fatigue. I know I have to make this decision, but I want to, but I don't know how, but it just doesn't really matter. Let me just stay in my situation. It's almost easier that way. And it can lead to a lot of decision-making paralysis as well, to go, well, there's so many things I need to do. People are telling me all these things. I have to set financial goals. I have to create a budget. I have to do this, I have to do this. But I actually also just have to care for my family and put food on the table. And so it's, I think, definitely very much linked to the reality, the attitude. But I think as soon as we step into it and we start doing, it really does activate that. And yeah, it's very
I think,
critical.
yeah, and I think, again, that's where employers can come in, because by curating services and products, you can remove some of that decision fatigue. And I don't remember the numbers right now, but there's some sort of study looking at how many items you place on a shelf in a supermarket. And if there's too many choices, people just walk out. They don't buy one. They want a little bit of choice. I think Costco's kind of nailed it. They've really Goldilocksed it in their product lines, for example. But if you go in and there's 17 types of jam, you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm not going to buy any jam, and you leave. And so this plays out more. And I think the other, I'd say, kind of behavioral science piece, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Sim, is loss aversion. So when you talk about planning for the future, you're often foregoing something right now. And there was a famous study out of Cornell University involving mugs. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
No, please share.
So some students were given a mug for free and other students weren't. And the students that had the mug were asked how much they would be willing to sell it for, like what would they need to be given to give the mug away. And if you didn't have a mug, you were asked how much you would pay to buy this Cornell mug. And there was a gap. If you already had the mug, you put a higher price tag on it. And it would, like, I need $10 to give the mug away. But if you didn't have the mug, you would put maybe $6 on it. I'd be willing to pay $6 for that mug. So something that we already have that gets taken away from us, or perceived to be taken away from us, it hurts more. And so again, this is where things like automated interventions, or like a workplace savings program where it just comes off of payroll and never hits your bank account. You take away that feeling of loss, like you calm that loss aversion down, and you make it easier for people to make long-term decisions. So there's definitely knowing yourself. And I think we're kind of two sides of the story here, which is you've got to know yourself, and you've got to be able to make your own productive decisions, but you also need the tooling and sometimes the interventions to make those easier for you to follow through on.
I wish we could speak about this the whole day. I know we have about like 5 or 6 minutes left. I can't believe time has gone by so quickly, but just want to highlight on a couple of things, because maybe there's some individuals joining the call today from like an organization's perspective saying, well, I want to implement more things in my company and I don't know what to do, especially when it comes to financial well-being. So I think, there's the practical ways. You can create some budgeting workshops for your teams to attend, to talk about this, or retirement planning sessions, or access to financial counseling. That's, I know, one thing that we do. We have a lot of financial business coaches that's a part of our platform that is there to assist individuals when they're going through this. But what are you also seeing currently, what people are doing in the workplace to make sure that they're implementing that help and support to others to set themselves up, especially in the research that you've done, frontline workers, individuals that's getting paid weekly? Just highlight a couple more perhaps practical skills on what people can perhaps do within their organizations to see how they can help.
I think there's a really important couple of steps you can do when you think about your financial well-being in your organization. So one is just thinking about who your workforce is and if there's any particular groups you're prioritizing kind of over others. So if there's particular parts of the population, maybe you have a slightly older workforce and people are nearing retirement, so you might be thinking more about like how do you cater to those needs. Maybe you have a slightly younger workforce. You might employ lots of workers who are new to UK, or a predominantly female workforce, in which case you might be thinking about financial exclusion. So how do you solve for financial exclusion, so kind of access to useful and affordable tools? So that's part of it. The other thing I'd say is do this cross-functionally, because sometimes you have benefits and kind of features kind of giving with one hand and then policies taking away. So if you're kind of creating financial well-being over in a team over here, but then you have a sick pay policy which is very ungenerous or statutory only, or you have a shift scheduling policy that's incredibly last minute, so people can't plan ahead and don't have that visibility and predictability, you're actually potentially harming well-being just through some of your operational policies. So getting kind of all your stakeholders in a room and saying, well, what are we actually doing and what is the impact on people is incredibly important. So just sort of asking yourselves those questions and then going out to your people and understanding what matters to them. So what is important to them right now? What do they care about? I'm a big fan of kind of asking the question and getting that information to shape something. But there's really simple free things that you can be doing. You can look at a workplace savings provider. You'll have credit unions biting your hand off if you want to work with a credit union, for example. They would love your business. You can work with a tech partner like Wagestream. We'll bite your hand off too. But you can implement like a payroll savings program that can be really, really powerful. You can also look at how you use the data you already collect to nudge people and predict what they might be entitled to, for example, in benefits and grants. And then the last thing is just communicate.
Yeah.
Most organizations I've spoken to have actually done a lot, and you sort of forget when you live in one of these people teams that not everybody pays attention to everything you do all the time. And you might think you've told people, but you have to relentlessly communicate what's in place. And if you can do it through case studies and make it feel socially okay to have questions about money, you could train a money first aid. I could keep going, but like there's a lot of simple free things that you can be doing just to drive those conversations, but also to make sure that the work you've already done is being seen and surfaced and valued by your employee base.
Such good points you highlighted there. And I think most importantly, something that from the other side of the spectrum, so this is what we can do as HR teams, as financial teams, as organizations, but to keep it simple for people. Financial stress is already stressing them out. There's already things that's stressing your workforce out. Try keep the way that you want to help individuals as simple as possible, so that it can make sense for the individual to say, okay, well, like we were touching and highlighting on decision making, well, this is as simple as XYZ, and also to make it practical as possible, and to have that rewards at the end. I think that's very important too. And the more we try equip and empower our teams with these tools, the happier they'll be. And we know that will have a massive effect on everything else we do within our organizations. So well done on the amazing work that you're doing as an organization, as a company. I'm so excited to continue listening to you on YouTube and on LinkedIn, and all the great resource that you are sharing, but also the research that you're constantly doing, especially I think in the next couple of years. We've seen from the mental health space all the changes that has taken place when it comes to mental health in the workplace, financial well-being in the workplace. We're only touching the surface. And it's going to be great to see what you are going to be doing next in the future. So thank you so much for having me on this webinar.
Oh, thank you, Sim. It's been such an interesting discussion, and I love hearing your perspective on things, and also bringing it back to the self is really important. And I'm going to go away and reflect on that too. And I would love to do a cheeky plug for the Invisible Worker podcast, shameless plug. But if you are interested in the topics around how the majority of the working world manage their money, what are the big interventions and kind of movements that have made a difference to people, it's out now.
I'm very excited. I told you the other day too, when we were meeting, I hang on to every single word you say. So I'm very excited to be listening to this. So well done. Keep up the good work.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. That was such a fascinating discussion. I hope everyone on the call enjoyed it and found it insightful as well. We will follow up shortly with the report, Mind Over Money, that today's discussion was based on, along with some additional resources. But thank you again for joining, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.